Elsie Holloway was the girl everyone admired, quiet, graceful, raised in the heart of Willow Creek. Jacob, Aaron, Levi, and Thomas were her cousins, trusted sons of proud families. But behind closed doors, they shared more than blood. They shared her. When their secret unraveled, it didn't just fracture a family, it triggered a massacre that left 4 young men dead. One girl accused of orchestrating it all, and a father shattered by the truth he uncovered too late. This is the true story of obsession, betrayal, and bloodlines turned fatal. Willow Creek was the kind of town where time moved slower. With a population of just under 3,000, life there was simple, steady, and rarely shaken by anything more than a strong thunderstorm or a town hall argument about parking laws. Rows of modest homes lined the streets, most with chipped white fences and carefully kept flower beds. It was a place where everyone waved even if they didn't know your name, and families gathered every Sunday for church, rain or shine. Crime was nearly non-existent. The sheriff had more paperwork than arrests, and the community's biggest scandals usually involved a misplaced casserole dish or a teenage prank gone too far. The Holloways fit right in, or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. Michael Holloway, a widower in his early 50s, ran the town's only auto repair shop. He was known for his hard work, quiet demeanor, and the way he always offered a discount to struggling single mothers or elderly customers. People respected him. He wasn't the type to stir up trouble or gossip, and he raised his daughter Elsie with a sense of firm but fair discipline. He hadn't dated since his wife died in a car crash a decade earlier, and in many ways Elsie had become the center of his world. Elsie was soft-spoken, polite, and seemingly devout. She attended the local church choir every week and helped with children's Sunday school. Most people saw her as a model young woman, humble, kind, and well-behaved. She volunteered at the library in the afternoons and still lived at home, working part-time at a coffee shop downtown. Everyone in town saw her as the kind of girl who would one day marry a local boy, raise kids, and settle into the same quiet rhythm that defined Willow Creek life. No one questioned her. No one looked twice. But Michael began to notice little things, subtle changes. Elsie started staying out later than usual, claiming she was with friends, but when he casually asked around, none of her close acquaintances seemed to know about these late-night meetups. Her phone, once left openly on the kitchen counter, became a fixture in her pocket, locked, guarded, and silenced. She had also become more withdrawn, less responsive during their family dinners and occasionally snappy when asked simple questions. Michael wasn't the suspicious type, but the feeling in his gut grew heavier with each passing week. He wasn't worried about drugs or drinking. Elsie had always been straight-laced, but there was something else, something that didn't fit. His daughter wasn't just hiding something. She was protecting it fiercely, and whatever it was, it had changed her. He started checking the mileage on her car when she left for the evening. He noticed it added up to far more than a drive to the movies or the nearby coffee shop. One night while she slept, he opened her laptop, something he had never done before. He didn't find much, just encrypted messaging apps and an empty search history. Too clean, too deliberate. The following day she confronted him about it before he could even explain. Her eyes didn't show fear. They showed cold disappointment. That shook him more than anything else. Weeks later, Michael's suspicions reached a boiling point. One evening, while working late in his garage, he found something unusual under the passenger seat of Elsie's car. A second cell phone, nearly dead, its screen cracked. Curiosity turned into dread as he charged it and began scrolling through the messages. Hundreds of them scattered across different contacts, each one more bizarre than the last. The names on the screen were familiar. Jacob, Aaron, Levi, and Thomas. Boys from family reunions, second and third cousins, all part of the Holloway bloodline. The messages weren't just casual. They were intimate, obsessive, and in some cases deeply disturbing. Phrases like "no one else can have you" and "we were made for each other, blood or not" appeared again and again. There were pictures too, some suggestive, some affectionate, all of them confirming what Michael had feared. Elsie wasn't involved in a relationship. She was involved in 4, and all of them were with her own relatives. The weight of what he had uncovered made him physically sick. He sat in his dark garage for hours that night, trying to make sense of what he had seen. His hands trembled as he read through the threads again, hoping he was wrong, hoping that maybe this was some sick joke. But it wasn't. The timestamps, the photos, the conversations, they were real. And they painted a portrait of something far more than youthful rebellion. This was deliberate, coordinated, secretive, and it had been happening right under his roof. What disturbed him most wasn't the relationships themselves, as grotesque as they were. It was the way the cousins spoke about one another. Jealous, territorial. They viewed each other as rivals, not family. Each one seemed to believe he was Elsie's favorite. There was tension in their words, like matches being struck near gasoline. Michael could sense the danger even then, though he didn't yet understand how far it would go. He thought about going to the police. Then he thought about confronting the boy's parents. But in a town like Willow Creek, where family name meant everything, even whispering something like this could cause irreparable damage. He decided to wait, to gather more evidence, to understand just how deep the rot had spread. But that choice, to pause, to stay silent for just a little longer, would prove to be the most devastating decision he'd ever make. Because while he hesitated, the fire was already catching. Michael Holloway never imagined that the roots of his family tree could twist into something so grotesque. What he uncovered in his daughter's hidden phone was not just shocking. It was a betrayal of everything he believed his family stood for. After the initial wave of nausea and disbelief, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a one-time mistake. Maybe Elsie had gotten caught up in something she didn't fully understand. But the more he read, the more impossible it became to deny what was really happening. Elsie wasn't just romantically linked to one cousin. There were 4. Each relationship had its own tone, its own rhythm, its own history. Jacob, the oldest at 24, had been the first. Messages dating back nearly 2 years revealed a pattern of manipulation disguised as affection. He often reminded Elsie that they shared something deeper than blood. He played the role of protector, warning her against getting close to anyone else, including her own friends. Aaron, 22, had a different kind of bond with her. His messages were obsessive, filled with jealousy and paranoia. He constantly asked where she was, who she was talking to, whether she still loved him more than the others. He demanded loyalty, promising they'd one day run away together and start fresh somewhere no one would know their story. But his tone was possessive, even threatening. At times it felt like he wasn't in love with Elsie as much as he was obsessed with owning her. Levi, 20, seemed the most emotionally volatile. His texts read like a roller coaster, passionate declarations of love followed by cold silence, then sudden eruptions of anger when he didn't get a response quickly enough. His history with Elsie went back to their teenage years when they'd reportedly grown close during summer family visits. It was clear he believed their connection was fate, destined and spiritual. He talked about having children with her, building a life, undoing what he called the lies of society that said they couldn't be together. Thomas, the youngest at 19, had a more recent and confused involvement. His texts were scattered and uncertain, like someone drawn into something he didn't fully understand. He often asked Elsie if the others knew about him. He was insecure, desperate for reassurance, and easily manipulated. Out of all the cousins, he seemed the most emotionally dependent, the easiest to sway, and perhaps the most dangerous because of it. What Michael found most disturbing was how calculated the entire web appeared. The cousins didn't seem to know about each other's full involvement, but each one had suspicions. There were veiled threats, accusations of betrayal, and passive-aggressive comments that suggested growing tension among them. It wasn't just romantic rivalry. It was a tightly wound circle of obsession and jealousy, with Elsie at the center, knowingly or unknowingly playing a dangerous game. The messages painted a picture of secret meetings, empty barns on the edge of town, remote forest clearings, even late-night encounters in the back of parked cars. They used coded phrases to arrange meetings and burner phones to stay off their family's radar. Elsie had become skilled at deception, crafting different personas for each cousin, telling each one what he wanted to hear. Whether she was the victim or the architect of this chaos, Michael couldn't yet tell. He started researching the laws, searching for a way to protect his daughter and expose the truth without destroying what was left of his family. But every move felt like quicksand. Reporting incest in a town like Willow Creek, where appearances mattered more than facts, would cause a scandal that would swallow all of them. Worse, he didn't even know how the local authorities would respond. Many of the involved families were prominent. Some sat on the church board, others ran businesses tied directly to the sheriff's office and town council. If word got out without evidence that couldn't be ignored, it would be his word against theirs, and his daughter's life would be torn apart publicly. As he quietly continued to investigate, Michael began to notice changes in the cousins. They were no longer friendly during family events. They eyed each other warily, often refusing to be in the same room. Jacob and Aaron had nearly come to blows at a barbecue over a vague comment about loyalty. Levi had started avoiding the larger gatherings altogether, and Thomas, once cheerful and outgoing, had grown pale and withdrawn. The tension was palpable, and no one seemed to know why. Michael began to suspect that something was going to happen, that the fragile secrecy surrounding the situation was unraveling. He started documenting everything: screenshots, phone records, locations. He even installed hidden cameras in the house, not because he didn't trust Elsie, but because he feared what might happen if one of the cousins found out they were not the only one. He could feel the danger rising, and yet he felt powerless to stop it. Then came the night a rock was thrown through their living room window. There was no note, no follow-up, no witness. Just shattered glass and silence. A week later, he found the family cat dead in the yard, poisoned. The vet confirmed it. Someone was sending a message. He didn't know who, but it confirmed what he already feared. The affair had stopped being just a twisted secret. It had turned into a war. Elsie remained unreadable. She acted normal, smiled, sang in the choir, came home on time. But Michael could see it in her eyes. She was scared. Or maybe she was in control and just hiding it better than the rest. He couldn't tell anymore. What he did know without a shred of doubt was that something irreversible was coming. Something brutal. And no one, not the cousins, not Elsie, not even himself, was ready for what lay ahead. Michael Holloway had always believed that secrets, no matter how dark, could be handled with calm reason and firm hands. But what had started as a father trying to protect his daughter had now grown into something he could no longer control. The situation wasn't just unstable, it was explosive. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. The four cousins were not only obsessed with Elsie, but with the idea that they were competing for her in a deadly game none of them fully understood. The tension grew thicker with each passing day. Michael's once peaceful home had turned into a pressure cooker. He barely slept, waking at the slightest sound, constantly checking the security cameras he had installed around the property. The footage never showed anything concrete, but he often spotted vehicles slowing near the house late at night. Unmarked cars, headlights off, just watching. He kept a loaded shotgun by the bed just in case. He tried to keep Elsie close, to subtly steer her back toward normalcy, but she had become more distant than ever. Her expressions were unreadable, her tone flat, her movements calculated. She wasn't angry or frightened, just cold. It was as if a switch inside her had flipped, cutting her off from guilt or fear. Michael couldn't tell if she was protecting herself or orchestrating something behind the scenes. Whenever he asked simple questions, she offered vague answers, and when he pushed, she simply walked away. Rumors began to circulate in Willow Creek. A local boy claimed he saw two of the cousins arguing near the old railway tracks late one night. A waitress at the diner overheard a heated conversation between Levi and Aaron that ended with the words, "You're not the only one she's lying to." One of the church elders mentioned seeing Elsie crying in the parking lot after choir practice, but when approached she smiled and claimed she was fine. Always fine. Michael decided to confront the cousins' parents one by one, hoping they might intervene. But those conversations led nowhere. Some didn't believe him, others accused him of trying to cover up something worse. One aunt broke down in tears, saying she'd suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it. Still, no one took action. The families were paralyzed, either too ashamed or too scared to step forward. The town's silence became a shield for the dysfunction. And beneath that silence, the storm kept building. Things came to a head when Michael found his garage broken into. Nothing was stolen, but his workbench had been overturned and a message had been scratched into the metal surface with a knife. "Stop." That same night, his car's tires were slashed, and a strange substance was poured into the gas tank. He didn't report it. He already knew the answer he'd get from the sheriff: no proof, no case. He cleaned up the mess, patched the tires, and started keeping a record of every threat, every odd occurrence, hoping he could piece together something solid before it was too late. But the true tipping point came with a single, silent discovery. One evening, while reviewing footage from the security cameras, Michael caught something chilling. Around 3:12 a.m., a figure approached the back of the house. The resolution was grainy, but the body language was unmistakable. Someone trying not to be seen. The figure walked slowly, cautiously, staying in the shadows. Then it stopped outside Elsie's window and stood there for 6 full minutes. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. The next day, Michael checked the ground below the window. Faint footprints in the dirt. A broken twig. That was all. When he asked Elsie about it, she said she hadn't heard anything. He didn't believe her. The cousins, meanwhile, were spiraling. Jacob stopped showing up to work. Aaron reportedly punched a classmate at the community college over a comment no one could recall. Levy had taken to posting cryptic messages on social media, quoting verses about betrayal and bloodlines. Thomas, perhaps the most fragile of the four, had stopped attending family events altogether. He was seen sitting alone at the town lake for hours, just staring at the water, motionless. Michael now understood that what began as a twisted love triangle had grown into something uncontainable. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was rage, obsession. Each cousin believed he had been wronged, manipulated, and discarded, and each one was preparing to fight for what he thought was rightfully his. The competition had become war, not one against another, but one against everyone. Still, no one in town stepped forward. No one wanted to believe what was happening, not even those who saw the warning signs. Families closed ranks. Churches stayed quiet. Even the sheriff, who surely had heard the whispers, pretended not to notice. Willow Creek had turned inward, hoping silence would smother the fire. But the fire was already raging, invisible only to those who refused to look directly at it. Michael began making plans. He created copies of the phone data, hid them in multiple places, and wrote a detailed letter outlining everything he knew. If something happened to him or Elsie, he wanted someone, anyone, to be able to put the pieces together. He started talking to a lawyer in the next county, weighing whether to file for protective custody or force Elsie into a psychiatric evaluation. But part of him still held out hope that this could end quietly. That maybe, just maybe, the cousins would walk away. That hope would not last long. Because unknown to Michael, all 4 cousins had received a message the same week. Same wording, same tone. Each one was told to meet Elsie at the Holloway house. Same time. Same night. Alone. The invitation had been sent. The trap was set. And the blood moon was just days away. The night unfolded with a silence that felt unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. October 7th had been marked on calendars across the town for its rare astronomical event, a blood moon. For most people in Willow Creek, it was nothing more than a curious sight, something to glance at before heading to bed. But inside the Holloway home, beneath the glowing red light that spilled through the windows, something horrifying had already begun to take shape. Michael returned home around 9:30 p.m., tired from a long day at the garage. As he pulled into the driveway, a sense of unease crept over him. The street was quieter than usual, and the house looked darker than it should have been. The porch light, which he always kept on for Elsie, was off. The blinds were drawn tightly shut. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house, trying to convince himself that it was nothing. Just a light left off. Just a curtain pulled too far. But the second he stepped inside, he felt it. Something was wrong. The air was heavy, unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that settles right before something terrible happens, or right after. He called for Elsie. No answer. He moved through the front hall, noticing the quiet scrape of his boots against the hardwood floor. Then he saw it. A thin trail of dark red across the wall. Blood. Not a smear, not a drop. A deliberate streak that started at the living room and led toward the rear of the house. His stomach turned. He reached for the crowbar he kept in the hall closet, heart racing. He followed the trail cautiously, stepping over a broken picture frame, shards of glass crunching beneath his feet. As he rounded the corner, he froze. Jacob's body was lying in the hallway, twisted unnaturally, his shirt soaked in blood. His eyes were open, glassy, staring blankly at the ceiling. The stab wounds were precise, almost methodical. There were no signs of a struggle around him, which meant either he had been caught off guard, or he had trusted the person holding the knife. Michael staggered backward, pulse pounding in his ears. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the blood moon seeping through the windows. But the silence told him there was more. This wasn't over. The trail of blood continued, leading toward the basement door. He gripped the crowbar tighter and opened the door slowly. The hinges creaked. A damp, metallic smell drifted upward, stronger now. He descended the stairs one slow step at a time. Halfway down he could hear a sound. Not footsteps, not a voice. Something else. Breathing. Uneven. Quiet. The basement lights flickered as he reached the bottom. The scene that greeted him was like something out of a nightmare. Aaron's body lay slumped against the furnace, his face bruised and swollen. A bent metal pipe lay beside him, slick with blood. Near the washing machine, Levi was sprawled on the concrete, a bullet wound in his chest. Michael's hunting rifle, normally locked in a safe, rested against the wall. And then, in the center of the basement, surrounded by blood and broken things, was Elsie. She was on her knees, hands shaking, her sweater soaked in red. Her face was pale, blank, and her eyes were fixed on something, or someone. Michael followed her gaze. Thomas was lying just feet away, his body limp, a phone cord wrapped tightly around his neck. His fingers were curled inward, frozen in the grip of his final moments. There were deep bruises along his throat, and a broken cell phone near his hand. It looked like he had tried to call someone, maybe for help, maybe for her. Elsie didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't move. Michael stepped closer, still holding the crowbar, unsure whether to comfort her or protect himself. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Just a shallow, rattling breath. She looked up at him, and in that moment, he saw a kind of emptiness in her eyes that terrified him more than the blood or the bodies. The police arrived within the hour. By then, Michael had already called 911, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what he had found. The scene was sealed off, and the once quiet street became a swarm of flashing lights, uniforms, and curious neighbors staring from behind closed doors. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives uncovered messages on the cousins' phones, all of them summoned to the house that night with the same message. "Come to LCS, she's ready to choose." No sender ID, just a single chilling sentence. Each cousin had believed they were being invited for a final resolution, a promise, a future. Instead, they had walked into a trap. Elsie's story was inconsistent. She said they arrived separately, that arguments broke out, that things escalated quickly. She said she tried to stop the fighting but was overpowered. She hid in the basement, terrified, until it was over. But the evidence didn't fully match her version. Fingerprints were found on weapons in places that didn't align with a defensive position. There were signs that some of the violence had occurred before the others arrived. The gun had been wiped down, the knives placed carefully on the counter upstairs. There were too many unanswered questions. Psychological evaluations painted a disturbing portrait. Elsie had been emotionally entangled with each cousin for years. Some experts suggested she had been groomed. Others argued she had been in control the whole time. She knew how to play each of them, how to fuel their rivalries, how to get what she wanted without ever appearing responsible. And perhaps the most disturbing theory of all, she had orchestrated it as a way to end the chaos once and for all. Michael watched from a distance as the truth unraveled, or what passed for truth. His daughter was no longer the soft-spoken girl he had raised. Whatever had happened in that basement, whoever had committed the first act of violence, was now buried beneath a web of lies, fear, and blood. The house was boarded up days later. No one wanted to live there. No one could. It stood like a tombstone, marking the night when secrets finally turned to slaughter under the blood-red glow of a silent moon. The trial began 6 months after the murders, but the impact of what had happened lingered in Willow Creek long before the courtroom doors opened. The town, once known for its calm and kindness, had been hollowed out by the massacre. Families who once sat together at church now avoided eye contact. Former friends passed each other on the street without speaking, and the Holloway house, dark and abandoned, remained untouched, a grim reminder of the violence that had erupted within. Elsie was charged with 4 counts of second-degree murder, along with charges of conspiracy and obstruction. The prosecution argued that she had deliberately lured the cousins to the house that night, manipulating them with false promises. The anonymous messages sent to their phones, they claimed, had all been written by her using a burner phone recovered from a storm drain 2 blocks from the house. The fingerprints on the device were faint, but a forensic expert testified that a partial print matched Elsie's thumb. The defense painted a much different picture. They described Elsie as a victim of long-term psychological abuse beginning in her early teens. Family history, previously hidden beneath a surface of politeness, was dragged into the light. Diaries, messages, and testimony from medical experts revealed that Jacob had initiated contact with her when she was barely 15. Over time, the other cousins became entangled in what some called a shared delusion, each believing they were meant to be with her, each convinced that their love was justified, even holy. One psychologist explained that Elsie's ability to manipulate the cousins had developed as a survival tactic. She learned how to appease each one to avoid emotional or physical retaliation. The courtroom listened in silence as pages of messages were read aloud. Some were loving, others were controlling. A few were outright threatening. They showed a pattern, each cousin isolating her, promising escape, blaming the others for stealing her affection. Witnesses described seeing bruises on Elsie's arms. Others recalled changes in her personality, the way she flinched when certain names were mentioned, how she seemed constantly on edge. It became clear that whatever role she had played in the events of that night, it hadn't come from nowhere. Something had been building for years. The basement bloodbath was the eruption of a pressure that no one around her had been willing, or able, to recognize in time. Michael took the stand on the fourth day of the trial. He recounted everything: the strange behavior, the burner phone, the messages. The night he returned home and found the bodies. His voice broke only once, when describing the look in Elsie's eyes that night in the basement. Not rage, not panic, just emptiness. A daughter he no longer recognized. The town watched the trial unfold with morbid fascination. Some believed Elsie was evil. Others believed she was a tragic figure, pushed to the edge by years of trauma and betrayal. The jury deliberated for 9 hours before delivering their verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter on 3 counts, and guilty of second-degree murder on 1. The judge, taking into account her mental health history and lack of prior offenses, sentenced her to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18. Some were outraged, others relieved, but no one was satisfied. No sentence, no explanation could fully make sense of what had happened. 4 young men were dead. A daughter was in prison. A father was left to carry the weight of a truth too heavy for words. Michael sold the house within weeks of the sentencing. The property was bought by a developer who promised to tear it down and build a new home in its place. But as months passed, nothing was built. The land sat empty, overgrown and silent, as if the earth itself refused to forget. Michael moved to another state. He changed his phone number, took a job in a neighboring town, and rarely spoke to anyone about his past. He never returned to Willow Creek, not even once. The town, too, tried to move on. The church held a memorial service. The local newspaper published an article titled, "Lessons in Silence," reflecting on how so many warning signs had been ignored. School counselors began offering sessions on mental health and abuse. For a time it felt like maybe something good could grow from the wreckage. But time, as it often does, dulled the pain without erasing the memory. Whispers continued. Children dared each other to sneak onto the old Holloway lot at night. Some claimed they saw shadows near where the house once stood. Others said they heard voices in the wind, cries, arguments, names. Elsie remained in prison, her case studied in psychology classes and criminal justice programs across the country. She never spoke publicly again after her trial. No interviews, no memoirs, just silence. Occasionally, reporters requested comment. She declined every time. And so the story became legend. A cautionary tale whispered in small towns. A story about what happens when love becomes obsession, when secrets are buried too deep and when no one wants to see what's right in front of them. The truth didn't belong to one person. It belonged to everyone who had ignored the signs, everyone who had stayed quiet when it mattered most. In the end, it wasn't just a family that was destroyed. It was an illusion. That darkness couldn't exist in a place like Willow Creek. That trust was unbreakable. That love could never twist into something deadly, but it did, and no one who lived through it would ever forget.